Hello. Happy Wednesday, everybody. I'm Charlotte. This is Quarantine Story Time. We are reading War and Peace and have been doing that as during our time sheltering in place from COVID-19. If this is your first time here, welcome. Check out the War and Peace playlist with all the readings. At this point, we are a little more than a third of the way into the book. We're in volume 2, part 3, section 16 today. If you were here before, or if you weren't, you may remember that we are just getting into a ball. The Rostov family, the parents, the Count and Countess Rostov, and their daughter Natasha, and their young charge Sonia, who's like a poor orphaned cousin, a couple times removed, who lives with them. They are at this ball. Here, Bezukov, the Count Bezukov, is there with his wife Helene. Prince Andrei Bolkonsky is there, and many other notable people. It's at the diplomatic corps, or the Dutch ambassador's house, I believe is what they said. So they've been fussing all day getting ready, and they're there now. Hey, Mom. I have the live chat up. Say hi. So yeah, we're going to jump back in. Hopefully you guys have gotten a chance to sign some of the petitions I put up, read some things. Last night I watched on Netflix the Spike Lee film, Defy Bloods. I found it was really good. It's about Vietnam vets, 4 Black Vietnam vets going back to Vietnam 40 years later because it was like there's gold that they're going to dig up and they're looking for the remains of their one of their compatriots who died. Yeah, it was really, what do you think? It was really good. I don't know if anybody else watched it, but yeah. I thought it was really, really good. Spike Lee has such an interesting, like, unique style, but the acting was amazing. And I mean, like, Spike Lee's style is really cool. It's so very unique to him, though, that you can always kind of tell there's certain things. And I like how he handled just sort of like the aging of the men and everything, and like the dialogue versus like the sweeping, like, storytelling, cinematic shots. It was really good. Definitely recommend watching that. It's on my list of things, and I got a few other ones I wanted to watch too. I still haven't seen Denzel and Malcolm X, so I really want to see that. And the 13th. Yeah. Definitely deals a lot with like the PTSD. But I think it was interesting, and not to give anything away, but how like one character suffered differently because of what his experiences were versus some of the other characters. So yeah, it was very good. But as always, those links are in the description of my videos after I've posted, or after the videos have gone live and they're posted up. Yeah. Also, a reminder, tomorrow I will be reading earlier. I'm reading at noon tomorrow because I have a dentist appointment. Gotta get my teeth fixed. I think I have a filling that came out, and I have some wisdom teeth coming in. So there's just like a lot going on in there. I need to have it looked at by a professional. Also, I just wanted to say, because I think I mentioned the other day, Friday is canceled in celebration of Juneteenth. Friday is Juneteenth. It is a holiday most commonly celebrated among Black community in America, and there is a big move to have it more celebrated more universally in America. Because it's basically a day that celebrates the emancipation of the slaves. So if you're not familiar with it, look up Juneteenth and celebrate. I know there are marches and things you can go to support. We'd like to do that. I will be doing that with a friend. But just remember to stay safe, both from COVID-19 and from, there's been a lot of accounts of agitators infiltrating different peaceful marches or protests to try to cause trouble, to try to cause damage, harm people, get police involved, that sort of thing. So just keep your eyes and ears open, keep your mouth and nose covered, and keep your distance when you can, and just be supportive, but be aware. But anyways, yeah, so no reading Tomorrow's reading is earlier, and Friday's reading is canceled to celebrate Juneteenth. Those are my announcements. Next week, it looks like Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday will have the same readings, and Thursday and Friday I'll have to find an alternate schedule on those days. So I'll keep you all posted. All right, so without further ado, let's get into the ball because it sounded really exciting. So, section 16. Suddenly, everything stirred. The crowd began to talk, moved together, parted again, and between the two rows of people to the sounds of the struck-up music, the sovereign came in. Behind him walked the host and hostess. The sovereign walked quickly, nodding to the right and left, as if trying to get quickly past this first moment of meeting. The musicians played a polonaise well known then from the words written to it. These words began, Alexander, Elizaveta, how we all admire you. The sovereign walked into the drawing room. The crowd surged towards the door. Several persons with changed expressions hurriedly went there and back. The crowd surged away from the drawing room door again, and the sovereign appeared in it, talking with the hostess. A young man with a perplexed look, pressed up to the ladies, asking them to step aside. Some ladies, with faces that expressed a total obliviousness to all social conventions, pushed forward, ruining their fancy dresses. Men began to approach the ladies and form couples for the polonaise. Everyone made way, and the sovereign, smiling and out of step with the music, led the hostess through the drawing room door. After him came the host with Madame M.A. Narushkin, the ambassadors, ministers, and various generals, whom Madame Peronsky kept naming without pause. More than half of the ladies had partners and were joining or preparing to join the polonaise. Natasha sensed that she would be left with her mother and Sonia among the smaller part of the ladies, pushed back against the wall and not asked to polonaise. She stood, her thin arms lowered, her barely defined bosom rising rhythmically, holding her breath, her shining, frightened eyes looking straight ahead with an expression of readiness, either for the greatest happiness or for the greatest grief. She was interested neither in the sovereign nor in any of the important persons Madame Poronsky pointed out. She had one thought. Can it be that no one will come up to me? Can it be that I won't dance among the first? Can it be that all these men won't notice me, who now don't even seem to see me, and if they look at me, it's with such an expression as if they were saying, ah, it's not her. There's no point in looking. No, it can't be, she thought. They must know how I want to dance, and how well I dance, and what fun it will be for them to dance with me. The sounds of the polonaise, which had continued for quite a long time, were already beginning to seem sad, a reminiscence in Natasha's eyes. She wanted to cry. Madame Poronsky left them. The Count was at the other end of the room, the Countess, Sonia, and she stood alone, as if in a forest, in this crowd of strangers, of no interest or need to anyone. Prince Andrei walked past them with some lady, obviously not recognizing them. Then the handsome Anatoly, smiling, was saying something to the lady he was leading, and glanced at Natasha's face as one would glance at a wall. Boris walked past them twice and turned away each time. Berg and his wife, who were not dancing, came up to them. For Natasha, this family intimacy here at a ball seemed offensive, as if there were no other place for family conversations except at a ball. She did not look at and did not listen to Vera, who was saying something to her about her green dress. Finally, the sovereign stopped beside his last partner. He had danced with 3, and the music ceased. The preoccupied adjutant ran up to the Rostovs, asking them to step aside somewhere, though they were standing at the wall. And from the gallery came the distinct, careful, and engagingly rhythmic sound of a waltz. The sovereign looked over the room with a smile. A minute passed. No one began yet. The adjutant master of ceremonies went up to Countess Bezukov and asked her to dance. Smiling, she raised her arm and placed it, without looking at him, on the adjutant's shoulder. The adjutant, master of ceremonies, an expert in these matters, confidently, unhurriedly, and rhythmically, keeping firm hold of his partner, set off with her at first in a glissade around the edge of the circle, then, at the corner of the room, took her left arm, turned her, and now, above the ever-quickening sound of the music, one could hear only the rhythmic jingle of the spurs on the adjutant's quick and nimble feet. And at every third beat, the velvet dress of his partner seemed to flash, flying as she turned. Natasha looked at them and was ready to weep that it was not she dancing this first turn of the waltz. Prince Andrei, in his white cavalry colonel's uniform, stockings, and low boots, animated and merry, stood in the first rows of the circle, not far from the Rostovs. Baron Virchow was talking to him about the first session of the State Council, planned for the next day. Prince Andrei, being close to Speransky and taking part in the work of the Legislative Commission, could give accurate information about the next day's meeting, of which various rumors were circulating. But he was not listening to what Virchow was telling him, and looked now at the sovereign and now at the gentleman preparing to dance, who had not yet ventured into the circle. Prince Andrei was observing these gentlemen, grown timid in the sovereign's presence, and ladies faint with the desire to be invited. Pierre came over to Prince Andrei and took him by the arm. "You always dance. My protégée, the young Miss Rostov, is here. Ask her," he said. "Where?" asked Bolkonsky. "I beg your pardon," he said, turning to the Baron. "We can find this conversation elsewhere. At a ball one must dance." He stepped forward in the direction Pierre had indicated to him. Natasha's desperate, rapt face caught Prince Andrei's eye. He recognized her, guessed her feeling, realized that she was a debutante, remembered her conversation on the window ledge, and with a merry expression on his face went up to the Countess Rostov. "Allow me to introduce you to my daughter," the Countess said, blushing. "I have the pleasure of being acquainted, if the Countess remembers me," said Prince Andrei, with a courteous and low bow, totally contradicting Madame Perronsky's remarks about his rudeness, going up to Natasha and raising his arm to put it around her waist, but even before he finished asking her to dance. He suggested a turn of the waltz. That rapt expression of Natasha's face, ready for despair and for ecstasy, suddenly lit up with a happy, grateful, childlike smile. "I've been waiting a long time for you," this frightened and happy girl seemed to say with her smile, shining through ready tears as she raised her arms to Prince Andrei's shoulder. They were the second couple to enter the circle. Prince Andrei was one of the best dancers of his time. Natasha's dancing was excellent. Her little feet in satin ball slippers did their work quickly, lightly, and independently of herself, and her face shone with the rapture of happiness. Her bared neck and arms were thin and unattractive compared to Helene's shoulders. Her shoulders were thin, her bosom unrefined, her arms slender, but on Helene there was already a sort of varnish from all the thousands of gazes that had passed over her body, while Natasha looked like a younger girl who was bared for the first time and would have been very ashamed of it if she had not been assured that it had necessarily to be so. Prince Andrei liked to dance, and wishing to rid himself quickly of the political and intellectual conversations with which everyone addressed him, and wishing to break quickly this vexatious circle of embarrassment caused by the presence of the sovereign, he had gone to dance and had asked Natasha because Pierre had pointed her out to him, and because she was the first pretty woman his eyes fell on. But as soon as he put his arm around her slender, mobile, quivering waist, she began to move so close to him and smile so close to him. The wine of her loveliness went to his head. He felt himself revived and rejuvenated. Catching his breath and leaving her, he stopped and began to look at the dancers. Section 17. After Prince Andrei, Boris came up to Natasha and asked her to dance. Then also that dancer adjutant who had opened the ball, and other young men, and Natasha, sending her surplus partners to Sonia, happy and flushed, did not stop dancing all evening. She noticed nothing and did not see any of what interested anyone at the ball. Not only did she not notice how the sovereign had a long talk with the French ambassador, how he talked with particular graciousness with a certain lady, how Prince so-and-so did and such, how Helen had great success and was granted the special attentions of so-and-so. She did not even see the sovereign, and noticed that he had gone only because the ball became more animated after his departure. In one of the merry cotillions after supper, Prince Andrei danced again with Natasha. He reminded her of their first meeting in the Otradno Avenue, and how she could not fall asleep on that moonlit night, and how he involuntarily overheard her. Natasha blushed at this reminder and tried to justify herself, as if there was something shameful in that feeling which Prince Andrei had involuntarily overheard from her. Prince Andrei, like all people who had grown up in society, liked to encounter things in society that did not have the general society stamp on them. Natasha was just that, with her astonishment, joy, and timidity, and even her mistakes in French. He treated her and talked to her with particular tenderness and care. Sitting next to her, talking with her about the simplest and most insignificant subjects, Prince Andrei admired the joyful shining of her eyes and smile, which referred not to what they were saying, but to her inner happiness. At those times, when Natasha was chosen, she got up with a smile and danced through the room. Prince Andrei especially admired her timid grace. In the middle of the cotillion, Natasha, having finished a figure, still breathing hard, was going to her seat. A new partner again asked her to dance. She was tired and out of breath, and obviously wanted to refuse, but then again cheerfully raised her arm to her partner's shoulder and smiled to Prince Andrei. The smile said, "I'd be glad to sit and rest with you. I'm tired, but you see, I've been asked to dance, and I'm glad of it, and I'm happy, and I love everyone, and you, and I understand all that, and much, much more." When her partner left her, Natasha ran across the room to invite two ladies for the figures. "If she goes to her cousin first, and then to the other lady, she'll be my wife," Prince Andrei quite unexpectedly said to himself, looking at her. She went to her cousin first. What nonsense sometimes comes into one's head, thought Prince Andrei. But the one sure thing is that this girl is so sweet, so special, that she won't spend a month dancing here before she gets married. It's a rarity here, he thought, as Natasha, straightening a rose that had gone awry on her corsage, was sitting down beside him. At the end of the cotillion, the old count in his dark blue tailcoat came over to the dancers. He invited Prince Andrei to come and see him, and asked his daughter whether she was having a good time. Natasha did not reply, and only smiled a smile, which said with reproach, "How can you ask me that?" "I've never enjoyed myself so much in my life," she said, and Prince Andrei noticed how her thin arms rose quickly to embrace her father, and at once dropped again. Natasha was happier than she ever had been before in her life. She was in that highest degree of happiness when a person becomes perfectly kind and good, and does not believe in the possibility of evil, unhappiness, and grief. At this ball, Pierre felt insulted for the first time by the position his wife occupied in high spheres. He was sullen and distracted. There was a deep furrow across his brow, and standing by the window, he looked through his spectacles, seeing no one. Natasha walked past him on her way to supper. Pierre's gloomy, unhappy face struck her. She stopped in front of him. She wanted to help him, to transfer to him the overflow of her own happiness. "Such a merry time," she said, "isn't it, Count?" Pierre smiled distractedly, obviously not understanding what was being said to him. "Yes, I'm very glad," he said. "How can they be displeased with anything?" thought Natasha, especially since such a nice man as this Bezukhov. In Natasha's eyes, all who were at the ball were equally kind, nice, wonderful people, and loved each other. No one could offend anyone, and therefore they should all be happy. Section 18. The next day, Prince Andrei remembered yesterday's ball, but his thought did not dwell on it for too long. Yes, it was a very brilliant ball, and then too, yes, Miss Rostov is very sweet. There's something fresh in her, something special, non-Petersburg, that makes her different. That was all he thought about the ball, and having had a tea, he sat down to work. But from fatigue or lack of sleep, the day was not good for work, and Prince Andrei could do nothing, kept criticizing his own efforts, as often happened with him, and was glad when he heard someone arrive. The visitor was Bitsky, who worked on various commissions, frequented all the societies of Petersburg, was a passionate admirer of new ideas and of Speransky, an anxious Petersburg newsmonger, one of those people who choose a trend as they do their clothes, according to the fashion, but who, because of it, looked like the most ardent partisans of the trend. He rushed into Prince Andrei's room, and barely managing to take his hat off, anxiously began talking. He had just learned the details of the session of the State Council that morning, opened by the sovereign, and was recounting it with rapture. The sovereign's speech had been extraordinary. It had been one of those speeches which only constitutional monarchs make. The sovereign said straight out that the council and the Senate were estates of the realm. He said that the government should not be based not on arbitrariness, but on firm principles. The sovereign said that the finances should be reformed and the accounting made public. Bitsky recounted, emphasizing certain words and widening his eyes significantly. Yes, today's event marks an epoch, the greatest epoch in our history, he concluded. Prince Andrei listened to his account of the opening of the State's Council, which he had awaited with such impatience and to which he had ascribed such importance, and marveled that this event, now that it had taken place, not only did not move him, but seemed less than insignificant. With quiet mockery, he listened to Bitsky's rapturous account. The simple thought occurred to him. What do Bitsky and I have to do with what the sovereign was pleased to say in the council? Can any of it make me happier and better? And the simple reflection suddenly destroyed for Prince Andrei all his former interest in the reforms being carried out. That same day, Prince Andrei was supposed to dine at Speransky's en petit comité. As the host had said when inviting him, this dinner in the circle of family and friends of the man whom Prince Andrei admired so much had formerly interested him very much. the more so as he had not yet seen Speransky in his domestic surroundings, but now he did not want to go. At the appointed dinner hour, however, Prince Andrei was already entering Speransky's modest private house near the Tavrichky garden. In the parqueted dining room of the modest house, distinguished by its extraordinary cleanness, reminiscent of monastic cleanliness, Prince Andrei, who was slightly late, found that at 5 o'clock the whole company of that petit comité of Speransky's intimate acquaintances had already gathered. There were no ladies except for Speransky's little daughter, with a long face resembling her father's, and her governess. The guests were Gervais, Magnitsky, and Stolypin. In the front hall, Prince Andrei already heard loud voices and ringing, clipped laughter similar to what one hears on the stage. Some voices, similar to Speransky's, rapped out a distinct ha ha ha. Prince Andrei had never heard Speransky laugh, and this ringing, high-pitched laughter from a statesman struck him as strange. Prince Andrei entered the dining room. The whole company was standing between two windows by a small table with hors d'oeuvres. Speransky, in a gray tailcoat with a star, and evidently in the same white waistcoat and high white necktie he had worn at the famous session of the State Council, stood by the table with a merry face. The guests stood around him. Magnitsky, addressing Mikhail Mikhailovich, was telling an anecdote. Speransky listened, laughing beforehand at what Magnitsky was about to say. Just as Prince Andrei entered the dining room, Magnitsky's words were again drowned out by laughter. Stolypin produced a loud bass, chewing a piece of bread and cheese. Gervais hissed out a quiet chuckle, and Speransky laughed his high and clipped laugh. Speransky, still laughing, gave Prince Andrei his white, tender hand. "Very glad to see you, Prince," he said. "Just a moment," and he turned to Magnitsky, interrupted his story. "We've agreed that tonight will be a dinner for pleasure and not for a word about business." He turned back to the speaker and laughed again. Prince Andrei listened to his laughter and looked at the laughing Speransky with surprise and sad disappointment. This was not Speransky, but another man, as it seemed to Prince Andrei. Everything in Speransky that had formerly seemed mysterious and attractive to Prince Andrei suddenly became clear and unattractive to him. At the table, the conversation did not let up for a moment and seemed to consist of a collection of funny anecdotes. Before Magnitsky finished his story, someone else announced his readiness to tell something still funnier. The anecdotes were for the most part concerned, if not with the world of government service, then with persons in the service. It seemed that the insignificance of those persons who had been so definitely decided upon in his company, that the only possible attitude towards them was a good-naturedly comic one. Speransky told how at the council that morning, a deaf dignitary, when asked his opinion, had replied that he was of the same opinion. Gervais recounted a whole case about an audit, remarkable for the senselessness of all the persons involved. Stolypin, stuttering, mixed into the conversation and began talking vehemently about abuses under the former order of things, threatening to give the conversation a serious character. Magnitsky began to make fun of Stolypin's vehemence. Gervais put in a joke, and the conversation resumed its formal merry course. Obviously, Speransky liked to relax after work and make merry in a friendly circle, and all his guests, understanding his wish, tried to make him merry and be merry themselves. But this merriment seemed heavy and cheerless to Prince Andrei. Speransky's high-pitched voice struck him as unpleasant, and his constant laughter, for some reason, offended Prince Andrei's feelings by its false note. Prince Andrei did not laugh and feared he would be a deadweight on the company, but no one noticed his lack of harmony with the general mood. They all seemed to be very merry. He wanted several times to enter the conversation, but each time his word was thrown out, like a cork out of water, and he was unable to joke along with them. There was nothing bad or inappropriate in what they said. Everything was witty and might have been funny, but that something which constitutes the salt of merriment was not only missing, they did not even know it existed. After dinner, Speransky's daughter and her governess got up. Speransky stroked his daughter with his white hand and kissed her, and this gesture seemed unnatural to Prince Andrei. The men remained at the table over the port, English style. In the middle of the conversation that started up about Napoleon's Spanish campaigns, of which they had all held the same approving opinion, Prince Andrei began to contradict them. Speransky smiled, and obviously trying to divert the conversation from the direction it had taken, told an anecdote that had no relation to it. They all fell silent for several minutes. Having sat at the table for a while, Speransky corked the wine bottle and saying, "Good wine costs a pretty penny these days," handed it to the servant and got up. They all got up, and with the same noisy talk went to the drawing room. Speransky was handed 2 envelopes brought by a courier. He took them and went to his study. As soon as he left, the general merriment died down, and the guests began talking sensibly and quietly with each other. "Well, now for a declamation," said Speransky, coming out of his study. "An astonishing talent," he said to Prince Andrei. Magnitsky at once assumed a pose and began to recite humorous verses he had composed in French about certain persons well known in Petersburg, and was interrupted several times by applause. When the verses were over, Prince Andrei went up to Speransky to take his leave. "Leaving so early?" said Speransky. "I promised to be at a soiree." They fell silent. Prince Andrei looked closely into those mirror-like eyes, which did not let anything in, and felt how ridiculous it was that he could have expected anything from Speransky and from all his activity connected with him, and that he could have ascribed importance to what Speransky was doing. That precise, mirthless humor went on ringing in Prince Andrei's ears long after he had left Speransky. On returning home, Prince Andrei began to recall his Petersburg life of those last 4 months as if it were something new. He recalled his solicitations, his petitioning, the story of his project for military regulations, which had been taken into consideration, but which they had tried to silence solely because another project, a very bad one, had already been developed and presented to the sovereign. He recalled the sessions of the committee of which Berg was a member. He recalled how, at these sessions, everything to do with the form and procedure of the committee sessions was discussed carefully and at length, and everything to do with the essence of the matter was carefully and briefly dispensed with. He recalled his work on legislation, the concern with which he had translated the articles of the Roman and French codes into Russian, and he felt ashamed of himself. Then he vividly pictured Bogucharovo, his occupations in the country, his trip to Ryazan, recalled the muzhiks, the headmen drawn, and applying to them the personal rights he had classified by paragraphs. He felt astonished that he could have been occupied with such idle work for so long. Section 19. The next day, Prince Andrei went to visit certain houses he had not been to yet, among them the house of the Rostovs, with whom he renewed his acquaintance at the last ball. Besides the rules of courtesy, according to which he ought to call it the Rostovs, Prince Andrei wanted to see at home that special animated girl who had left him with such a pleasant memory. Natasha was one of the first to meet him. She was wearing a dark blue everyday dress, in which she seemed still better to Prince Andrei than in a ball gown. She and the whole Rostov family received Prince Andrei like an old friend, simply and cordially. The whole family, which Prince Andrei used to judge so severely, now seemed to him to consist of wonderful, simple, and kind people. The old count's hospitality and good nature, which struck one especially nicely in Petersburg, was such that Prince Andrei could not refuse to stay for dinner. Yes, they're kind, nice people, thought Bolkonsky, who of course don't understand a whit of the treasure they have in Natasha, but kind people who constitute the best backdrop for setting off this special girl, so poetic, lovely, and overflowing with life. Prince Andrei sensed in Natasha the presence of a special world, completely foreign to him, filled with joys of a sort as yet unknown to him. That foreign world which even then in the Otradno Avenue and at the window on that moonlit night had enticed him so. Now that world no longer enticed him, it was no longer foreign to him. Now that world no longer enticed him, it was no longer foreign to him, but he himself, having entered it, found in it a new delight. After dinner, Natasha, at Prince Andrei's request, went to the clavichord and began to sing. Prince Andrei stood by the window, talking with the ladies, and listened to her. In the middle of a phrase, Prince Andrei fell silent and suddenly felt choked with tears, which he did not know was possible for him. He looked at the singing Natasha, and something new and happy occurred in his soul. He was happy, but at the same time he felt sad. He had decidedly nothing to weep about, but he was ready to weep. About what? His former love? The little princess? His disappointments? His future? His hopes for the future? Yes and no. The main thing he wanted to weep about was a sudden, vivid awareness of the terrible opposition between something infinitely great and indefinable that was in him, and something narrow and fleshly that he himself, and even she, was. This opposition tormented him and gladdened him while she sang. As soon as Natasha finished singing, she went over to him and asked him how he liked her voice. She asked it and became embarrassed just after she said it, realizing that it was not a question to be asked. He smiled, looking at her, and said that he liked her singing just as he liked everything she did. Prince Andrei left the Rostovs late in the evening. He went to bed as was his habit, but he soon realized that he could not sleep. Lighting a candle, he would sit on the bed, then get up, then lie down again, not troubled in the least by his insomnia. He felt as joyful and new in his soul as if he had gone from a scruffy room into God's open world. It did not occur to him that he was in love with Miss Rostov. He was not thinking of her. He only pictured her to himself, and owing to that, his whole life appeared to him in a new light. Why do I thrash about? Why do I fuss inside this narrow, limited frame when life, the whole of life with all its joys, is open to me? He said to himself, and for the first time in a long while, he began to make happy plans for the future. He decided that he must occupy himself with the education of his son by finding a tutor for him and entrusting the boy to the tutor. Then he must retire from the service and go abroad to see England, Switzerland, and Italy. I must use my freedom while I feel so much youth and strength in me, he said. Pierre was right when he said that one must believe in the possibility of happiness in order to be happy. And I now believe in it. Let the dead bury their dead. But while I'm alive, I must live and be happy, he thought. Section 20. One morning, Colonel Adolf Berg, whom Pierre knew, as he knew everyone in Moscow and Petersburg, came to see him in a spanking new uniform and with his side whiskers brushed and pomaded forward as the sovereign Alexander Pavlovich wore them. I just called on the Countess, your spouse, and was so lucky as to have my request go unfulfilled. I hope that with you, Count, I shall have more luck. I was so unlucky as to have my request unfulfilled. And I hope that with you, Count, I shall have more luck, he said, smiling. What can I do for you, Colonel? I'm at your service. I am now fully settled in the new apartment, Count, Berg informed him, obviously knowing that it could not be unpleasant to hear it, and therefore would like to arrange a small soiree for my and my wife's acquaintances. He smiled still more pleasantly. I wanted to ask the Countess and you to do me the honor of joining us for a cup of tea and supper. Only Countess Elena Vasilievna, considering the company of some sort of Berg was humiliating to her, could be so cruel as to refuse such an invitation. Berg explained so clearly why he wished to gather a small and good company at his place, and why this would be a pleasure for him, and why he would be sorry to spend money on cards or on something bad, but on good company he was ready to suffer that expense, that Pierre could not refuse, and promised to come. Only not late, Count, if I may ask. Around 10 minutes to 8, if I may ask. We'll have a game of cards. Our general will join us. He's very kind to me. We'll have supper, so do me the favor. Contrary to his habit of being late, Pierre came to the Bergs that day at 7:45 instead of 10 minutes to 8. The Bergs, having prepared everything necessary for the soiree, were ready to receive their guests. In the new, clean, bright study, decorated with little busts and little pictures and new furniture, sat Berg and his wife. Berg, in a brand new buttoned-up uniform, sat beside his wife, explaining to her that one can and must have acquaintances among people above oneself, because only then can one find pleasure in one's acquaintances. You can admit something, you can imitate something, you can ask for something. Just look how I've fared since the lower ranks. Berg reckoned up his life not in years, but in imperial rewards. My comrades are still nobodies now, but I already occupy the post of a regimental commander, and I have the happiness of being your husband. He got up and kissed Vera's hand, but on his way straightened the turned back corner of the carpet. And now, have I acquired it all? How have I acquired it all? Mainly by knowing how to choose my acquaintances. It goes without saying that one must be virtuous and precise. Berg smiled with a consciousness of his superiority over a weak woman and fell silent, thinking that all the same, this sweet wife of his was a weak woman, who could not comprehend all that made up the dignity of a man. Ein Mann zu sein, of being a man. At the same time, Vera also smiled with a consciousness of her superiority over her virtuous good husband, who all the same understood life wrongly, as, in Vera's view, all men did. Berg, judging by his wife, considered all women weak and stupid. Vera, judging by her husband alone, and extending the observation to everyone, supposed that all men ascribed reason only to themselves, and at the same time understood nothing, were proud and egotistic. Berg got up, and embracing his wife carefully so as not to rumple her lace pelerine, for which he had paid dearly, kissed her in the middle of the lips. "Only we shouldn't have children too soon," he said, following an unconscious association of ideas. "Yes," replied Vera, "I don't want them at all. One must live for society." "That's exactly the same as Princess Yusupov wore. That's exactly the same as Princess Yusupov wore," said Berg with a happy and kindly smile, pointing to the pelerine. Just then the arrival of Count Bezukov was announced. The two spouses exchanged self-satisfied smiles, each silently claiming the honor of that visit. "That's what it means to know how to make acquaintances," thought Berg. "That's what it means to know how to behave." "Only please, when I'm entertaining the guests," said Vera, "don't interrupt me, because I know how to entertain each of them and what to say in all kinds of company." Berg also smiled. "Impossible! Sometimes men must have a male conversation," he said. Pierre was received in the nice new drawing room, in which it was impossible to sit down anywhere without violating the symmetry, cleanliness, and order, and therefore it was also quite comprehensible. It was quite comprehensible and not strange that Berg magnanimously suggested disturbing the symmetry of an armchair or a sofa for his dear guest, and obviously in a painful dilemma himself in this respect, left the resolving of this question to his guest's choice. Pierre upset the symmetry by moving a chair towards him, and Berg and Vera at once began the evening, interrupting each other and entertaining the guest. Vera, having decided in her own mind that Pierre must be entertained by a conversation about the French embassy, began this conversation at once. Berg, having decided that there was also need for a male conversation, interrupted his wife and touched upon the question of war with Austria, and involuntarily shifted the general conversation to his personal considerations about the offers made him in regard to taking part in the Austrian campaign, and to the reasons why he had not accepted them. Though the conversation was very incoherent, and Vera was angry at the interference of the male element, the two spouses felt with satisfaction that even though there was only one guest, the soiree had begun very well, and that it was as like any other soiree, with conversation, tea, and lighted candles as 2 drops of water. Soon Boris arrived, Berg's old comrade. He treated Berg and Vera with a certain tinge of superiority and patronage. After Boris came a lady with the colonel, then the general himself, then the Rostovs, and the soiree now became quite indisputably like all other soirees. Berg and Vera could not contain their joyful smiles at the sight of this movement about the drawing room, at the sound of this disjointed talk, the rustling of dresses and bowing. Everything was like at everyone else's house, especially like was the general, who praised the little apartment, patted Berg on the shoulder, and with paternal authority ordered the table set for Boston. The general sat down to play with Count Ilya Andreevich as the most distinguished guest after himself. The count with the old, the count with the old, the old with the old, the young with the young, the hostess by the tea table, on which there were exactly the same cakes in a silver basket as the Panins had at their soiree. Everything was exactly the same as everyone else. Section 21. Pierre, as one of the most honored guests, had to sit down to Boston with Ilya Andreevich, the general, and the colonel. At the Boston table, Pierre happened to sit facing Natasha, and he was struck by the odd change that had taken place in her since the day of the ball. Natasha was silent, and not only was not as beautiful as she had been at the ball, but would even have been plain if she had not had the look of meekness and indifference to everything. "What's the matter with her?" Pierre wondered, glancing at her. She was sitting beside her sister at the tea table and replied reluctantly, without looking at him, to something Boris said as he sat down by her. Having gone through a whole suite and taken 5 tricks, much to his partner's delight, Pierre, who heard an exchange of greetings and the sound of someone's footsteps coming in the room as he was gathering in his tricks, looked at her again. "What's going on with her?" he said to himself with still greater surprise. Prince Andrei was standing before her with a solicitous, tender expression and saying something to her. She, having raised her head, was looking at him, blushing deeply and clearly trying to restrain her fitful breathing, and the bright light of some inner fire previously extinguished again burned in her. She was quite transformed. From plain she again became as she had been at the ball. Prince Andrei went over to Pierre, and Pierre noticed a new, young expression in his friend's face. Pierre changed his place several times during the game, sitting now with his back to Natasha, now facing her, and in the course of all 6 rubbers observed her and his friend. Something very important is going on between them, thought Pierre, and a joyful and at the same time bitter feeling stirred him and made him forget the game. After 6 rubbers, the general got up, saying it was impossible to play that way, and Pierre was set free. Natasha stood to one side, talking with Sonia and Boris. Vera, with a subtle smile, was talking with Prince Andrei. Pierre went over to his friend, and having asked whether what they were talking about was a secret, sat down beside them. Vera, having noticed Prince Andrei's attention to Natasha, had decided that at a soiree, a real soiree, it was necessary to have subtle allusions to feelings, and seizing a moment when Prince Andrei was alone, began a conversation with him about feelings in general and about her sister. With such an intelligent guest, as she considered Prince Andrei to be, she had to employ her diplomatic art. When Pierre came up to them, he noticed that Vera was conversing with self-satisfied enthusiasm, while Prince Andrei seemed embarrassed, which seldom happened to him. "What do you think?" Vera said with a subtle smile. "You're so perceptive, Prince, and understand people's characters so well as at once. What do you think about Natalie? Can she be constant in her attachments? Can she, like other women," Vera meant herself, "fall in love with a man once and remain faithful to him forever? That is what I consider real love. What do you think, Prince?" "I don't know your sister well enough," Prince Andrei replied, with a mocking smile, behind which he hoped to hide his embarrassment, "to answer such a subtle question. And besides, I've observed that the less attractive the woman, the more constant she is, he added, and looked at Pierre, who approached them just then. "Yes, that's true, Prince. In our time," Vera went on, mentioning our time as limited people generally like to do, supposing that they have discovered and appreciated the particularities of our time, and that people's qualities change with time. "In our time, a girl has so much freedom that le plaisir d'entrer courtesy often stifles her true feelings in her. Et Nathalie, elle fait avoir y est très sensible. The pleasure of being courted, and Natalie, it must be admitted, is very susceptible to that." The return to Natalie again made Prince Andrei wince unpleasantly. He wanted to get up, but Vera considered with still a more subtle smile. "I think no one has been so courtesy as she has courted," Vera said, "but till recently she never liked anyone seriously. You know, Count," she turned to Pierre. "Even our dear cousin Boris, who, entre nous, was quite dans le pays du tendresse, between us in the land of tenderness." She was alluding to, then, that popular map of love. Prince Andrei frowned and said nothing. "But you're friends with Boris, aren't you?" Vera asked him. "Yes, I know him." "Surely he told you about his childhood love for Natasha." "Was there a childhood love?" Prince Andrei asked, suddenly blushing. "Yes. Vous savez, entre cousine et cousine, cette intimité mène quelquefois à l'amour. Le cousinage est un dangereux voisinage, n'est-ce pas? You know that between cousins this intimacy sometimes leads to love. Cousinhood is a dangerous neighborhood, isn't it so?" "Oh, undoubtedly," said Prince Andrei, and suddenly, with an unnatural animation, he began joking with Pierre about how he ought to be careful in dealing with his 50-year-old Moscow cousins, and in the middle of the banter got up and, taking Pierre by the arm, drew him aside. "What now?" said Pierre, looking with surprise at his friend's strange animation and noticing the glance he cast at Natasha as he got up. I must have a talk with you," said Prince Andrei. "You know those women's gloves?" He meant the Masonic gloves, which were being given to a newly initiated brother to be presented to a beloved woman. But no, I'll talk with you later." Prince Andrei, with a strange gleam in his eyes and with uneasy movements, went over to Natasha and sat down beside her. Pierre saw how Prince Andrei asked her something, and she, blushing, answered him. But just then Berg came up to Pierre, insistently begging him to take part in an argument between the generals and the colonel about Spanish affairs. Berg was pleased and happy. The smile of joy never left his face. The soiree went very well, and exactly like other soirees he had seen. Everything was similar. The ladies' subtle conversation and the cards, and the general raising his voice over cards, and the samovar and the cakes. But there was one thing missing that he always had that he had always seen at the soirees he wished to imitate. The missing thing was loud conversation among the men and an argument about something important and intellectual. The general began the conversation, and Berg drew Pierre into it. Here we go. And that's the end of the reading for today. It's so funny, the treatment of Berg and Vera, because they are like such amusing characters, the way Tolstoy has them written. Like, they're so unimaginative as human beings, I guess I would say. Like, we want to imitate the way society parties happen, how everyone else is, so we can be just like everybody else. And, you know, they each think all men must be just like how I understand my husband to be, and all women must be just like how I understand my wife to be. Just too funny, that treatment of them. Their characters are pretty entertaining. And the ball was a lot of fun, and Natasha seems to be growing up, and Prince Andrei's interested. Oh my goodness. So my goodness. So teaser, it starts with a Prince Andrei. Tomorrow we'll be starting with Prince Andrei going to the Rostovs for dinner, so I wonder what that'll be. Yeah. Tomorrow I'm going to be reading at noon, like I said. And that actually, hopefully tomorrow we will round out the part 3 of volume 2, so we can get into part 4. So in case you're wondering where we're at. Thank you all for tuning in. Like I said, tomorrow I'm at noon because I have to leave for a dentist appointment. And then Friday is no reading in celebration of Juneteenth. Check out the links on the video once this video is posted, or any of the past videos. And I hope you guys are staying safe out there and serene. See you guys tomorrow. Have a great day.